And it was filmed actually at the Sands Hotel by Wayne McAllister, that was just a couple of years old at that time. And behind the characters, behind the bar, which stretched, a very long bar at the Sands, was a mural by Albert Stewart of this area, obviously. I'd seen photographs about it, I knew about it, but here I could see it in full color, Technicolor, as well. So this is how we have to kind of dig out a lot of this history. A lot of this history is not officially, recognized. It has not been documented, but there's so much out there. And that certainly is one message I want to send around, the state today. Whatever town you're in, big or small, if you're in Los Angeles, San Francisco, or Modesto, or Reedley, or wherever, there is probably something of interest there in terms of 20th century modern architecture. What I'm going to do today is talk about a very broad overview of the history of California modernism. These are the Tustin blimp hangers, which there are two of them, and one is definitely going to be kept and restored. The other one may be, we're hoping. Let's see. So where do I point it? Over here. Yeah.
Technology people. I can advance it if it doesn't work.
Okay. Is it working?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, but what I want to do is first and foremost, we have a given. Pardon?
It's good.
It'll be okay.
Just wait 1 second, and I'll do it for you.
Okay. The thing is that the history of California modern architecture, when we look at it, redefines what modern architecture is. Modern architecture generally is often focused on buildings like this. A Mies van der Rohe Museum in Houston in the upper left-hand corner. The Lever House in New York by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. A 1914 factory by Walter Gropius in Germany. And this definition of modernism as technological, skin with glass, flat roofs, geometric, and utilitarian aesthetic, that is part of modernism, but that is hardly all of modernism. And next.
It moved here, it's just not moving there.
Okay, it's got to go from there to there and probably do a satellite and then back down again. Which shows us the flaws in depending upon technology or technological imagery too much. There are other things going on in modernity. And in fact, modernism started in California around 1900 when a group of architects all across the state, north and south, thought that it was a new age, new materials, new building construction, new ways of life, and especially a new landscape here in California, a natural landscape, and that a modern architecture should respond to that. The Green Brothers and the Craftsman style is one example. Good. Okay, it changed over there. And then also, I will anticipate here, Bernard Maybeck up in the Berkeley area. This is the first Church of Christ Scientist using concrete, steel sash, modern materials, but creating one of the great spaces in the world architecturally with these box beams and the ornament and the glass and the light and so forth. This is modern architecture. Also, way down south in San Diego, we have Irving Gill, who is working with concrete, tilt-up concrete, and other forms of concrete as well. This is the arcade of the Women's Club in La Jolla, and through the arch you can see Ellen Scripps' house, also designed by Irving Gill. So 1900, 1905, 1906, 1912, long before the Bauhaus was formed by Walter Gropius in 1919, these California architects were looking at the future and modern materials, modern lives, and designing for it. Now, it doesn't look like the Lever House, but it is nonetheless modern architecture. Or you have Frank Lloyd Wright, who, of course, the Ward Willett's house near Chicago is an example of the prairie style, and of Wright's invention of modernism in Chicago at the feet of Louis Sullivan, of course. But then look what happens in the Willett's house is, I believe, 1904, 1905 or so. And about 15, 20 years later, Wright comes out to California and is building, for example, the Millard House in the early 1920s. Same brilliant architect, but he is changing his look, his materials, his spaces for California. The California environment inspired these architects to do different sorts of architecture. And California had the freedom, the cultural freedom. It was away from the centers of taste and power and fashion of the architecture and fashion worlds, New York in particular, or Europe. And we gave the freedom to these architects to do crazy things, like Rudolf Schindler at the Lovell House down in Newport Beach as well. Concrete, really a dynamic use of concrete early on. This is about 1925 or 26. Or Lloyd Wright, Frank Lloyd Wright's son. This is the Oasis Hotel out in Palm Springs. It's a slip-form concrete construction, very modern construction. And in the ornament at the top, you can see embedded in the concrete, he is evoking the natural scene as well. So these are all these very early examples. Is this working, John? Is that menu there on the screen anything to worry about?
Oh, no, don't worry about it.
Okay, I will not worry.
Continue your wonderful presentation.
So all of these architects were being inventive, creative, using the modern period to inspire in different ways. And this is one of my main messages to all of us Californians and those of us who are trying to preserve this heritage and identity of California. Modern architecture started in many places. California is one of those. It was not imported into California. It was born here, and then it did mix with other trends that were going on around the world. For example, this is Bertram Goodhue's Los Angeles Central Library. Under construction. I always find construction photographs to be interesting. There we go. Again, a concrete structure. Early 1920s by Bertram Goodhue, who came out to design the San Diego World's Fair in 1915, Caltech also, and several other buildings out here, including this. So he adapted and changed his whole idea about architecture for California and the modern period. But I want to look in this period, in the 1920s and the 1930s, an idea about modernism, which has kind of been swept under the rug a bit, but it's an urban architecture, and it is what? Well, we have a period which is usually kind of lumped in to the idea of the modern, Art Deco, streamline. These are the categories that later generations of historians have given to this period of the 1920s and 1930s. But I think if we take a little closer look at some of those examples, we see yet again a new creative idea about urban architecture that developed in Los Angeles and up in San Francisco as well. Again, these don't look like the Lever House. They are not strict rectangular, flat-roofed buildings, all covered with flat glass. They have a sculptural quality to them, but they aren't classical. Classical buildings classical skyscrapers of the time would have a base, then a shaft, and then some sort of ornament at the top. That was a classical Beaux-Arts way of looking at architecture. These buildings that I'm about to show you are instead modern. They are shafts that rise from the ground into the sky with some sort of pinnacle connecting them against, as a silhouette against the sky as well. A singular whole concept of a building. And we'll see, several different ways that California architects use that idea of a modern architecture for the urban areas. For example, and it comes out of Bertram Goodhue's library, that kind of stacked pyramid sort of composition leading up to a top knot of some sort against the sky. The architects that we're going to be talking about and showing you here are, for example, Timothy Pfluger, and up in San Francisco, and the Pacific Telephone Building as well, a really dynamic building from the late 1920s. Or in California, in Los Angeles, Morgan Walls and Clemente. We're going to be looking at the Richfield Building. We could also look at the Wiltern Building, several other buildings as well. These skyscrapers for the modern city that were developed. And why? Because these California cities, all cities in the country were booming in the 1920s, but California cities had the density and the number of architects, creative architects, that attracted creative architects in order to create new ideas. And as I said, it gave permission. Okay, I think we're ready?
Yeah, sorry about that.
And I can use, let's see, here we go, good. This is the Richfield Building. And again, you see, it is not a Beaux-Arts composition. It is a spire with setbacks all the way up into the kind of oil derrick-like pylon on the top of the building. It was also black with trim in gold terracotta. On the left is the Timothy Pfluger Pacific Telephone Building. And on the right is a Sears warehouse in Boyle Heights from the late 1920s with the addition of a 50s gas station in front. But you see the same sort of form. This was designed by a Sears in-house architect, and you'll see this building actually in several other cities around the country. But nonetheless, it is this new modern way of looking at a high-rise building. This building, incidentally, is being converted to residential lofts now, so it will be around for a long time. So that's one aspect. I've been asked to kind of identify certain look styles and kind of give you some of the ideas so that you can identify these. I want to talk about another aspect, very important aspect of California modern architecture, which is we often focus simply on the residential architecture. And we have great residential architecture here by Neutra, by Schindler, by Theodore Criley here, and many others. But California was just as innovative in its commercial architecture. Now, why is this important? Because commercial architects, restaurants, gas stations, bowling alleys, all of banks, all of these are buildings of everyday life, bringing modern architecture to the daily life of the average person in California, and this new way of living in the open air in California, new ways of thought. So, for example, even some of our best-known architects design commercial buildings. On the left is Sardi's by Rudolph Schindler near the corner of Hollywood and Vine. Right next to it is the Carl Laemmle building, and here's a daytime view on the right-hand side that you can see also by Richard Neutra. So we have office buildings, restaurants, and our very best architects are devoting their talent to commercial buildings. Commercial buildings are often kind of thought to be, I don't know, somehow lesser because they have a commercial motive, for example. Nonetheless, they did inspire many of our very best architects to do some of their very best work. You can't talk about California modern architecture in the 1930s without talking about Rudolf Schindler. This is the Oliver House as well. It is a classic modern building, but it is an international style per se. Schindler was not interested in creating static, flat forms, but of breaking up the box and creating this wonderful these wonderful interlocking spaces, which are expressed on the outside of the building in terms of different levels, different window shapes, corner windows, and the whole idea of the building kind of floating above the ground. Richard Neutra also. This is one of his earliest and most famous. This is the Lovell House in Griffith Park area. And again, you see the same ideas. This is more classically international style. It was, in fact, in the exhibit in 1932 at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which defined the international style. None of Schindler's houses were in that exhibit. The curators of that exhibit did not understand Schindler. He was so far in advance of most other architects that they just thought he was having fun, just not being serious about architecture. Here's Neutra right here in this lower slide at the construction of the Lovell House. And I want to point out the man second from the left there. That's Harwell Hamilton Harris. And he went on to design a great number of houses. He was influenced in many ways both by Frank Lloyd Wright and Richard Neutra. He was also a California native, grew up out in the desert, the Imperial Valley area as well. And this, just for one example, is a recently restored 1939 house by Schindler in the Hollywood Hills, Universal City. You see all the elements of Frank Lloyd Wright, the horizontal lines, the elements of Neutra, the geometric forms, and yet it is a Harris creation. Harris has done something new with this. This is also interesting, again, talking about all of these connections, because it was the house for Lee and Mary Blair, who were, of course, artists connected to Millard Sheets and Claremont, and the whole California School of Art. At the bottom are some of Mary Blair's creations for Disney cartoons and children's books and so forth. This is on the lower right-hand corner. This is one of her original design sketches for Alice in Wonderland. And just look at the graphic quality of that design, as well as the colors. Just extraordinary. This is the house that she and her husband, who was also an artist, lived in. There is this connection between Hollywood and particularly the Walt Disney Studio and modern architecture. Paul talked a little bit about this. It was Phil Dyke. It was Phil Dyke who worked with the Disney Studio as well. Yeah. This happens to be the 1949 house by Theodore Criley Jr., Claremont architect, for Franklin Thomas. Frank Thomas was another of the key Walt Disney animators. He was one of the 9 old men that really created the Disney Studio. 1949 in La Cañada. But you see in the upper left-hand corner, it is a very, very simple, simplified, gently sloping roof, a lot of glass because he had his studio in one of those bays that you can see. Wood house, almost a contractor vernacular design, very simple, very modern in that way, but beautifully crafted, as you can see in the living room in the lower right-hand corner, as well, with wood paneling, the indirect lighting and the soffit, the colors of the fabrics and the chairs and so forth. This building is also now on the National Register of Historic Places. Ted Criley, based here in Claremont. But then there are these other people that we don't know about, but are working in the modern idiom. This is the Halliburton House in Laguna Beach, up on the top of the hill, by Alexander Levy from 1939 also. It is all concrete, inside and out, and beautifully detailed, both inside and out. You can see that it is concrete construction. They've made no effort to panel over or gunite it or anything of that sort, but it's just the beauty of the modern material which creates the architecture. This building is almost completely unknown, but if it had been built in the Hollywood Hills, it would be one of the most famous modern buildings in California. Then up north, we also have William Wilson Webster in San Francisco. This is the Gregory Farmhouse from 1928 near Santa Cruz. Again, you see this interest in simplicity. This is almost the way a simple contractor or farmer would have built their wood house out in the hills someplace. But it is, again, in the hands of William Wilson Webster, beautifully detailed. And it is the very modesty, the very simplicity which he is using to design these houses. So you have, again, in California modern architecture, this influence of simplicity, of vernacular architecture, but not just the factory aesthetic of the Bauhaus. Cliff May, who also has several houses here in Claremont, an architect, though never officially licensed, but I still consider him an architect, grew up as a child in visiting a family home that you see at the top of right. That is an original adobe hacienda down in northern San Diego County. And he used those vernacular elements in helping to create the ranch house. So did the Gregory Ranch House that I just showed you as well, as part of this story. On the left-hand side is one of Cliff May's early ranch houses. Again, modest, simplistic, simple, but entirely devoted to a lifestyle of indoor-outdoor life, which suited Californians at that time. Cliff May would go on as well to be very influential on the development of the ranch house, as we'll be talking about. But by the late 1950s, he was also abstracting and recreating the ranch house in this more abstract form that you see on the lower right-hand slide. This is the house, incidentally, for one of the Lane brothers, who were the publishers of Sunset magazine. Or Albert Frey out in Palm Springs as well. Albert Frey worked for Le Corbusier for about a year. That's the Villa Savoye that Frey worked on with Corbusier in the late 1920s in Paris. But by the time he came out to California and the desert, he was radically changing his images. California was changing Albert Frey, and Frey was absolutely in love with California. The materials, the colors that you see, the roses, the yellows, the greens, are all desert colors that he's integrated into the building. Because what a great deal of this comes down to, and what California really does contribute to modern architecture, is an architecture of suburbia. Suburbia from the 20s and 30s, but especially after 1945, suburbia is a new form of city. So we aren't just dealing with individual buildings, we're dealing with urban design. And California led the way for the nation, really, in many ways. Much of it is conceptually based upon Frank Lloyd Wright's Broadacre City, which you see in the background of this slide. But it brought about things like suburban department stores, like Bullock's Pasadena by Werdeman and Beckett from 1947. This is a late modern design. It is not international style because it has too many angles and curves and fins on it, really, to be at a kind of severe international style. It's warmed up, it's more sculptural, And it also is designed for the parking lot, as you can see. Incidentally, stick around for Stephen Keelan's talk on landscape architecture. The landscape architecture for Bullock's Pasadena was by Ruth Shellhorn, a major landscape architect, and had a beautiful conceptual design for that. But also, for example, Stonestown Center up in San Francisco, also by Werdeman and Beckett. You see in the upper left-hand corner the indoor-outdoor mall of the shopping center itself. But notice what's around it. There's housing, high-rise housing, low-rise housing. Just to the left as well is San Francisco State University. There are doctors' offices, medical buildings, car dealerships. These shopping centers were not simply plopped down in the middle of nowhere. They were part of a city with the amenities that you want in a city, and in many ways walkable. We'll be seeing that in a while. And these other slides are some of the wonderful details of Stonestown Shopping Center by Werdeman and Beckett. Very classic, modern, glass boxes, but created in a very beautiful sculptural way. One of the main aspects of suburbia, of course, is mass-produced housing. This is also extremely modern, using modern mass-produced assembly line construction to create affordable housing for the masses. Here is Lakewood, as you can see, under construction. It was an assembly line. One crew would come through and build all of or pour all of the concrete slabs. Another crew would come through and hammer together the wood frames. Another crew would come through and do the plumbing and the roofing and the siding and so forth until you had a complete house, using the elements of mass production to cut costs and to solve the housing crisis in the United States at that time. This was a system which was really perfected here in Southern California before the Levitts did back east in the New York area. Here we have, on the right, a housing tract, very typical. This is in Orange, California. That was featured in a 1964 Look magazine feature. And on the left are those very houses today. They are still in good shape as a decent neighborhood. These houses have lasted now 50, 60 years. Here's a model house as well. This is a Julius Shulman photograph before he became famous for photographing case study houses. He was photographing, tract houses and everything else he could get his hands on. It's a beautiful picture as well as a good historic document. But while many, perhaps most, tracts were designed by contractors or the developers themselves or building designers, not architects, there are in California quite a number of housing tracts, mass-produced housing tracts built by really extraordinary, well-known architects. Up in the left-hand corner, of course, is one of the Alexander tracts by Palmer and Kreisel in Palm Springs. On the right-hand side, upper right, is a mass-produced housing tract by Smith and Williams. This is in the Anaheim area. And at the bottom, of course, we have an example of the Eichler houses by Quincy Jones and Emmons as well. So California modern architects were devoting their talents to designing not just tremendous monuments for politicians or cities or music centers or whatever, but also for the average person. And these are all over the state, and we need to look for them. It wasn't just figuring out how to build a lot of houses. You also had to put them together in decent ways, and that was not always very easy or very well known of how to do that. And builders kind of shied away from that because it seemed to take more effort, and they were afraid more money. That is why Irvine, California, is such an extraordinary landmark, because it is a master planned community, planned by William Pereira, opening in 1965, 51 years ago now, which didn't just plot down a lot of tract homes all in a row like cookie cutters, but arrange them into these sorts of communities. Notice in this slide, the green belts, which are common spaces for everybody to use. Notice in the center, the tennis court and the pool for everybody to use. To the up at the top of the slide is a school within walking distance, and off to the right is a shopping center as well. So these amenities were designed all together to create not just a tract, but an entire community, and to do it intelligently. This again is another innovation in which California modern architects excelled. But it wasn't just new cities like Irvine, Century City, planned by Walt and Beckett. In the 1950s and certainly in the 1960s, this idea of master planning, of saying, here we have a large piece of property, we want to have this use on it, office buildings, city, whatever. But how do we do it intelligently? How do we plan it according to the best known concepts of the time? And so we have here at the bottom of the slide, office buildings right off of Santa Monica Boulevard. The curved building right in the center is the Century Plaza Hotel by Minoru Yamasaki. Across the street from it, not yet built, are the two triangular twin towers that Yamasaki also designed. And then beyond it, at the top, is the 20th Century Fox studio, which sold all of this land to this new type of city, Century City. The two towers in the distance also are by I.M. Pei. They're residential towers. But again, it wasn't just in the 1960s and these important architects like Beckett or Pereira who had this idea of master planning. This is the city of San Clemente in Orange County in the early 1920s, which was also master planned, as was Palos Verdes, as was Westwood in the mid to late 1920s, as was Laguna Niguel by Victor Gruen. This is an advertisement for wonderful graphics again. Or Foster City up in the San Francisco Bay Area, which was actually planned by an engineering firm, Wilsey, Ham, and Blair, with houses, individual houses designed by, or built and by Joseph Eichler, as well as other builders, a collection of builders. Because these master plan communities weren't going to have all one type of housing. They were going to have less expensive townhomes. They were going to have single family homes. They were going to have apartments, because they wanted to engineer the social life of the city by having different people, variety, diversity in the city, to make what they felt would be a healthier city. Individual projects, recreational projects. This is Dana Point Harbor, started in 1969, which is a recreational harbor with restaurants, with slips for boats, with offices, with a hotel, etc. Again, a master planned concept, and in just beautiful condition. We'll show you later what is going to happen to that. Okay, the car culture, part of suburbia as well. The drive-in restaurants were not invented in California, but they were perfected in California. These are several drive-ins by Wayne McAllister as well, which are designed for the automobile. They're meant to be seen as you're going at 35 miles an hour down the street. That's what brings these large pylons, which are lighted at night so that they're visible at night as well as by day. They are open 24 hours, so they don't need a front door at all. So they have both indoor seating at the counter, or they have car hop service as well. And an innovative modern concept developed for architecture. I have a million of these slides. Tiny Nailers by Douglas Honnold's, Drive-In, now gone. This is the original Googie's restaurant by John Lautner, also now gone. but which you can see is modern, not in an international style way, but with an energy borrowed from the car culture, from the movement, the dynamism of the cars driving by. Bob's Big Boy in Burbank by Wayne McAllister as well. Notice this, the billboard, big billboard, which is there saying Bob's, but a billboard which is designed and integrated into the building. The sign becomes the architecture becomes the sign, another innovation of California architecture. Or down in San Diego, this is all over the state, Russell Forrester designed the Oscars restaurants first, which you see down here on the right, for Robert Peterson, and then Peterson had this idea of the Jack-in-the-Box restaurant, and Russell Forrester designed the first prototype for that, which you see in the upper left-hand corner. But again, notice the scale, small buildings, but the scale, the use of almost billboard-like elements, but beautifully designed and composed into the building. As in this Thrifty Mart, an average everyday supermarket, but here it is with all of this modern design to it. Or the McDonald's that Stanley Meston designed in 1953, or Norm's on La Cienega, which has qualified as a Los Angeles City landmark, though its future is still not entirely settled. And here's a shot of another Googie coffee shop, Ships, which shows how inside as well as outside, these modern concepts of flowing space, of indoor-outdoor spaces, of use of new materials, new colors, are integrated into the architecture. Here's a second Jack-in-the-Box prototype by Smith & Williams, Whitney Smith, who designed the housing that David was talking about. Intercultural. Yeah, same Whitney Smith, and his firm is designing the Jack-in-the-Box in the early 1960s. Look at the colors, look at the graphics. I see a lot of similarity here between this commercial building and what the Eames, Ray and Charles Eames, are doing in their design, their graphics, their materials, and their architecture. Car dealerships, car washes, gas stations, the theme building at LA. These are all elements of this exuberant modernism. Not staid, not kind of static, but showing the energy of modern design, modern life, modern cars. Or, of course, Millard Sheets. This is the home savings in Anaheim as well, very similar to the one in Santa Monica. But again, what is that big mural? It is a billboard. It is scaled so that people driving by can look at it, see it, notice it, but also get an idea of the character of the bank. That it's, you know, it's local friendly. It knows and loves the life, the modern life of the area. And that is what is being displayed on the front of these buildings. Very different. They are not, this is, again, Millard Sheets was interested, as others were, in vernacular architecture, historical architecture, but that's also part of modernism as well. Not all modern architecture has to be steel and glass and amazing engineering. The simplicity and the function of this building is just as modern. And in a city like Bellflower as well, you can see how all of these elements come together to create not just a single building, but an entire neighborhood of downtown Bellflower. That's a movie theater by S. Charles Lee on the left-hand side there. Signs alone as well are part of this modern architecture. This is an original Dennys in San Clemente, which still has its neon. So to move on, and I really do want to keep moving here, other aspects of modern architecture in California that we can identify. This is the Crown Zellerbach building in San Francisco on Market Street by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. Beautiful building, classic international style, a cube a couple of cubes put together. But then notice also this wonderful, whimsical little building at the base as well, which was the walk-in branch bank. So there were a lot of these sorts of modern buildings. But there was also this, the Capitol Records building by Welt and Beckett and Werdeman and Beckett as well. A circular building. Why is it circular? For efficiency, not just to be eye-catching, but because the use of floor space, the use of air conditioning and heating was more efficient in a circular building than in a square one. So this is a modern building form following function. Edward Durrell Stone, another aspect of modernism. This is neo-formalism. Stanford Hospital, which you can see is much more sculptural, using the ornamental elements as well, and creating indoor-outdoor spaces. In the lower left-hand corner, you have this screen which goes from outside to outside. The building has these courtyards in the middle, which you see in the upper left-hand corner, designed by Thomas Church. This building is threatened. Or down in San Diego, this is Muir College at San Diego, at University of California, San Diego. A brutalist building, concrete, raw concrete. It's raw concrete structure exposed. This is by Robert Mosier, and the student center in the upper right-hand corner is a more muscular post and beam structure by Dale Nagel. Robert Mosier, Dale Nagel, again, influential architects in San Diego, but names that we aren't as familiar with, but we should be. Or Caltech, this is the Beckman Auditorium by Edward Durrell Stone. Again, a neo-formalist building, borrowing elements of historical elements, the Greek tholos, but modernizing it as well. Modernists did not have to shy away from modernism. University of California at Irvine, brand new, by William Pereira. That's the library and the student center, in a photograph by Ansel Adams, incidentally. But neo-formalist as well in the symmetry of the buildings. Or the Music Center by Welt and Beckett Associates in Los Angeles. Any number of other expressionist ideas. The idea here is that California modernism was a field of experiment. Architects were allowed to try a lot of different things. Lloyd Wright at Wayfarers Chapel in Palos Verdes Estates created this outdoor chapel as well, where the landscape, the redwoods grow up over it as well. Or Ladd and Kelsey in Laverne, not too far from here. This is an all concrete, monolithic concrete structure. Ladd and Kelsey, who also designed the Norton Simon Museum. You may recognize this because it was used in the film The Graduate at the end. Yeah. Or Richard Neutra at the Garden Grove Community Church as well, a drive-in church seen on the left-hand side there, which also has been recently preserved with Barbara Lamprecht's consultation as well. And then the Crystal Cathedral at the same site by Philip Johnson as well, which is now undergoing interior alterations as well, since the Catholic diocese took over the complex. Other public buildings. There's a library in Palo Alto by Edward Durrell Stone. Stone is known for his kind of monolithic monuments, but here he has a beautifully neighborhood-scaled building as well. Or civic centers, Frank Lloyd Wright's Civic Center in Marin County, Richard Neutra's County Courthouse in Santa Ana. Or this is the, I've got to get this name right, I'm not, William DeLatt. This is the City Hall in Modesto, California. And DeLatt studied with Walter Gropius at Harvard and then came and did these civic buildings in Modesto. Landscape design, Stephen will be talking more about this, but it's part of the suburban landscape. This is Bowers Park in Santa Clara by Robert Royston as well. The cities had the vision and energy to hire these really great landscape architects to do these public buildings. Office spaces. This is the Stewart Pharmaceutical Building by Edward Durrell Stone in Pasadena. Also listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Another aspect of modernism, flat roof, yes, but the use of this filigree concrete block along one side and the beautiful slender gold columns landing in a landscape, a pool and landscape by Thomas Church, are all part of yet another idea about what modernism was to be. Or high-tech buildings, CBS radio building on Sunset, also recently restored by William Lescaz, or the Walt Disney Studios, 1939 in Burbank by Ken Weber, or the CBS Television City by Pereira and Luckman from 1950 as well. High-tech offices, campuses, workplaces, matching the high-tech industries of California. Boy, I have a lot in here. These are a couple of well-known modern houses, the Eames House and by Charles Eames, and the Kaufman House by Richard Neutra, which I'm sure you are all familiar with. But we can't forget also that there is John Lautner with the Elrod House, an expressionist sculptural element buried in the ground with the rocks of the cliff coming up into the middle of the house. And we also have William Webster at the same time. This is a beach house in Marin County near Bolinas as well. Again, going back to the utter simplicity of a vernacular building, simple gabled roof, shingles, nothing cheaper than shingles at the time, and yet in the proportions of the windows, etc., an exquisitely designed piece of architecture. Or this design by in Laguna Niguel. This is the first house in Victor Gruen's master plan town of Laguna Niguel. By, again, the name is just escaping me, the name of a vacuum cleaner. Name of vacuum cleaner. Not Hoover. Not Electrolux. No, oh well, it'll come to me later. But what this is a Portland cement house. And there are a number of these Portland cement houses, including here in Claremont by other architects. A model house. In this case, it's shaped like a mushroom with a central core, which you see on the right-hand side there, going up into this scalloped-edged roof as well. The sheer vision of what suburbia could be has all of these solutions. Apartment houses, on the left by Richard Dorman, on the right by Edward Thickett. Lloyd Rocco in San Diego designed this design center out of steel, a whole different way of looking at steel. William Cody designing the Springs Restaurant, a whole new way of looking at the restaurant. Look at that plan. Frank Gehry couldn't do a better plan. This building was designed in the mid-1950s. Jack Hilmer, seen there on the right. This is the Ludekins house in Belvedere Island as well. Or Ray Cappy as well. Lloyd Rocco, William Cody, Jack Hilmer, and Ray Cappy are four architects who were so original, so visionary in their own ideas, that they should be well recognized, much better than they actually are. And different locations. In the upper left-hand corner, Henry Hester's mass-produced houses in Laguna. On the right, J. Lamont Langworthy's solar hemicycle house. In the center, Stuart Williams' Idris house. Lower right-hand corner, Church by Charles Warren Callister. On the left, in Big Sur, the house of Nathaniel Owings by Mark Miller. So you have these locations, often recreational, often art communities as well, which generated their own distinctive architecture. Coming a little bit more, and I'm almost to the end here, We shouldn't forget commercial buildings like the glass curtain wall, this glass skin. These are not curtain wall buildings in the way that Mies van der Rohe designed them, with the columns that hold them in place. These are skins of glass tautly held around the building. This is really the very first one designed. It's the FAA Building south of LAX as well, by Caesar Pelli and Anthony Lumsden. And this gave birth to a whole range of corporate and business campuses as well that I won't even go into. Charles Moore as well, coming up into the late 1960s and 70s, using vernacular and Spanish historical elements, but in this abstracted composition. Lee Burns House in the upper left-hand corner, and the Faculty Club at UC Santa Barbara. Or a variation on that, using Spanish and Adobe and Southwestern elements that Hugh Capter did in the Tockett's office buildings in Palm Springs. Notice they have a masonry effect of that window frame as well. Okay, this is the wrap up, and part of this is sad, so I'll go quickly. Here's a Ralph's supermarket in Beverly Hills in the 1930s by Morgan, Walls, and Clements. Not one of these still remains in California. Here is a Richfield building being demolished in the mid-1970s. Here is a Frank Gehry building at the University of California, Irvine, being demolished a few years ago. Here's a William Pereira building, also at UC Irvine, on the left as it was built, on the right as it was remodeled. Or the Superior Market in Highland Park. Up in the upper left-hand corner is its original design, a great Googie design. And in the lower right-hand corner, how it was remodeled just a couple of years ago. These things can go in the wrong direction. LA County Museum of Art as well, by William Pereira on the left, and as Hardy Holtzman Pfeiffer remodeled it in the 1980s as well. Threatened now is Richard Neutra's Orange Coast College. This is the Dana Point Harbor that I showed you earlier, and the top is what they propose to replace it with. Biff's Coffee Shop in Oakland as well, as it originally was built, and lower is what is proposed to replace it. Or in Irvine as well, Mansionization on the upper left-hand corner, an original building, lower right-hand corner, the building that it was remodeled into. And finally, the one good bit of news, Johnny's Coffee Shop in Downey was illegally demolished in 2006. Here it is. But the city and the citizens got together and insisted that it be rebuilt by a Bob's Big Boy franchisee according to the original plans as well. A great success. And it's possible to do more of that as well. I know we're going to get into a discussion later more about these issues of preservation, so I will end it with that now. Thank you very much.
So we only have time for one question from the audience and one from the people online. So I have one here, but I'm going to wait until the first question is asked. 1 second.
Where do you place the Sea Ranch in all of this?
Sea Ranch is in there also, of course, by Moreland and Turnbull and Whitaker. And it is a modern building because it is using well, first of all, it's using vernacular elements, historic elements from that region, again, which is a trend in California modern architecture from the very beginning, going all the way back to Mabeck. But they are simplified, abstracted, and of course they have a recreational use as well, which was as second homes as well. So Sea Ranch is definitely part of the story.
Okay, and a question from the city of Anaheim, actually. What time frame, and this is kind of a provocative or could be interpreted different ways, I suppose. Is what time frame did the modernist movement span?
I really start modernism, which I define as the idea of redefining architecture for modern era, modern technology, modern lifestyles, modern imagery after the Civil War with Frank Furness in Philadelphia. He was one of the employees of Louis Sullivan, who of course then went on to help invent the skyscraper in Chicago in the 1880s and 1890s, and worked, Frank Lloyd Wright was his employee. That is where I think this idea of breaking with the past, creating something for the new era, really gets introduced in the United States. And I think it starts in the United States. When does it end? I don't know. I can't put an ending point because we still have these ideas churning through the society, I think.
And somebody named another vacuum cleaner manufacturer, so Oric, maybe?
No, not Oric. Starts with a B. Bissell. Thank you. George Bissell, an Orange County architect, designed that mushroom-shaped building. Thank you.
Just how big is that new book?
It's going to be very large. We're hoping to keep it under 100,000 words. I have a co-author, Pierre Luigi Serrano, so I'm only doing half of that. 400 images as well. It'll be a lot, and it will also leave a lot out, partly on purpose so that other people can fill in those gaps. There's so much that needs to be done, and I would encourage everybody, whether in local communities, small towns, or whatever you're interested in, there's a lot out there to be researched. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.